Well, good morning and welcome to the podcast. My name's Gavin Smith and it's a joy to welcome you. If you're joining us on video, thank you for taking a look in. I've got David Norbury with us today from the EMW, the chairman of the EMW, which stands for what? The Evangelical Movement of Wales?
Yeah, the Evangelical Movement of Wales, or Mudiad Evangeliaeth Cymru, if you're a Welsh speaker.
Which is great. Yeah, the first bit of Welsh on the podcast.
Hey!
It's fantastic to have David. I've asked him to come along. People know you very well, David. I've known friends. Lewis was telling me that you were heavily involved in him coming to know Christ. You've been involved in missions. You've been involved in churches. You described yourself earlier as the odd job man of church ministry.
That's about the odd job man in the kingdom of God. That's about me, I think. That's be on my gravestone.
You've been involved in lots of different things. David, tell us a little bit about yourself and your sort of background, because you weren't in pastoral ministry to start with, were you? You were in education to start with.
Yeah, well, I'm from North Wales, North East Wales. Yeah. So if people find it difficult to place my accent, so they sometimes think I'm Liverpudlian. Well, I'm 5 miles from Liverpool as the crow flies. Yeah. But North East Wales I was brought up, and a place called Connah's Quay.
Oh yes.
We have a famous football team called Connah's Quay Nomads.
Yeah.
And went to school in that area. Then went to Bangor University. Met my wife there. She told me she wasn't interested. So 6 years later, she said, "Okay, all right then." But until then, so 6 years in 7 years in Bangor. Studying, did a research degree in chemistry, and was involved in a church plant there, remarkably. It all happened while I was there. Started in a flat I was living in. Chap from India and a chap who now lives in Pembroke. They both did. Anyway, it doesn't matter about that, but it was a church plant anyway in Bangor, and that was a really big learning experience.
Yeah.
So then I got married, and we have 3 great lads and 2 great daughter-in-law and 7 amazing grandchildren.
7. Wow.
Now we live in Llanelli, so I've worked in all 4 corners of Wales, just like to say. Even though Wales isn't square, I've worked in all 4 corners of Wales, and I can say I'm now in south west Wales. So I'm West Wales. I'm learning Welsh still learning Welsh.
Good man.
I'm on day 753 in Duolingo Welsh. There you go.
Superb. And from what Andrew, your son's told me, and I've spoken to other people that are involved in EMW, you've been involved in so many beach missions and youth missions. You've served churches right across Wales for 20 plus 30 years. You got saved at 18, and you were straight involved in kind of ministry. Tell us a bit about some of the best missions that you've been involved in.
All right. Well, all I've done is taken the next step. I've never sort of had great visions in one sense, except that I do have a great desire to get the gospel out, whatever way I can possibly do that, and encourage other people. So it's not about me, it's about building teams, developing individuals, and getting the gospel out. So that's me. So I guess I was involved in beach mission through a maths teacher in school who was a key person in my conversion. And so the beach missions have been great over the years. And now one of the encouraging missions is in Mumbles that we still do. So we're down to be there this year. So we use Blackpill, which is a great area. Lots and lots of folk come there, and Langland Bay. So we run 2 concurrent missions for a fortnight in Mumbles. So that's great. But I think perhaps the most exciting thing was going around Wales, and because I was involved in the Evangelical Movement of Wales, churches were happy to work with us, and so we were able to help churches to run missions, and it was very exciting. When 60 churches helped out, I would think, and maybe 70 or 80 missions around Wales. Just was very, very encouraging, exciting to see how people just wanted to get the word out, and brought their friends, and some were converted. Yeah, so an interesting time, really.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Yeah, I love your passion to take the gospel and I love your passion to sort of serve smaller churches, and everyone needs that bit of support, doesn't it? And is that one of the key threads of the EMW? I know you do conferences, and there are camps that run, and supporting leaders, and there's a whole network of churches. But what were you specifically involved in the EMW? Because you've taken on the role of chairman for a number of years.
Yeah. Well, when I my professional career took me from teaching in North East Wales to being a science advisor to 380 schools in South West Wales, David as it was called then.
Yeah.
Then through to being an assistant director and head of school improvement in Newport with 80 schools and 25,000 pupils. So it was really that professional experience was excellent, and brought me into touch with loads and loads of people, and taught me a great deal really about how we can work with people, what people can do when they work together, and the importance of knowing your organization and knowing yourself. Lots and lots of things that were good. Anyway, that came to an end. It's interesting, really. Failure for me has led to success in different ways. I'm good at failure. So I didn't get the chief education officer post in Newport that I hoped I'd get, but I didn't. And that led to an early retirement, which was wonderful, really, because in Newport in those days, you didn't get early retirement. That was just unheard of. So I got out a year early, which was amazing. And then they were scraping a barrel in the Evangelical Movement of Wales. And there I was at the bottom without a job, and retired and a happy man. And so that's when I became General Secretary of the Evangelical Movement of Wales.
Yeah.
And I had no idea what I was letting myself in for, not the slightest clue, except that I'd run camps for years and been part of the camp system. So worked on that, knew about that. And then that really opened the door. It was just wonderful, really. An opportunity to work with lots of people across Wales, English and Welsh language, and to help run missions. But the big thing about Evangelical Movement of Wales was really serving churches. Yeah. What could we do to serve churches? What could we do that churches couldn't do or would find it difficult? So, for example, a small church can't run a camp.
Yeah.
Not effective camp, because they got not many folk in it. So we could run camps, and that's what EMW done for years and continue to do. A small church can't really run a conference. They just want to meet with other Christians, so we run conferences. And then supporting pastors is a big thing, and we've done that Evangelical Movement of Wales for years in English and Welsh. But perhaps the area that I most had a vision for was helping the people who I thought get the least help and the least training, namely elders, deacons, and often people who are Sunday school teachers or Sunday school secretaries or leaders. And that's an area where we had a particular focus. And amazingly, we had a North Wales and South Wales gathering in January. We decided January, no one else would be stupid enough to run any other meetings in January, so there wouldn't be any competition. So third weekend in January, on the Saturday, we'd have South Wales, and then the weekend after, North Wales event, inviting elders, deacons, leaders, and eventually church workers, so that folk could be trained or helped. At the very least, they could meet people who got the same challenges as them, and we'd be able to minister to them, and they could minister to each other as well. So that's basically, and we did that for about 10 years until COVID hit, and we managed to get a couple of 250 elders, deacons, leaders, people from small churches in the valleys, small churches in North Wales and West Wales, sometimes in South East as well. So lots of folk came, and it was just a wonderful time. And that became a Zoom meeting during the lockdown, and that was helpful. So folk who were struggling with all sorts of issues, not meeting people very often. Bill Swan led that, and that went really well. And that's become a podcast at the moment, but we've lost a bit of momentum on that. We need to get back on that track. We've got plans to improve what we're doing to help and support, especially smaller churches who have particular needs.
I love the heart of EMW. You know, just what you've captured there is serving churches, supporting the work of ministry that's, you know, might be, you know, 50 people in the church, and they can't run a camp. They've got some young people, you know, gathering together and putting it on together. Just, it is amazing. It really is. And you guys have been consistently doing that for years upon years and years.
Yeah.
And you hear about the fruit, and you know, I think it's excellent. And I just want to go back to what you were saying about your professional education, because you've got so many skills and experience that you developed in a secular, you know, career, but I'm sure you've been able to use them in organizing and structuring EMW to be able to do what they're doing. Tell us a little bit about how those two link together, because I think that's important, because God sort of prepares you, doesn't he, for roles, even when you feel unprepared yourself, or you feel like you're going into a new role and you think, how am I going to do this? But actually you look back and go, oh yeah, God, you know, gave me some experience in this area or in policy, and then I've been able to use that policy in the church now to, you know, to safeguard children, or to, you know, work with, you know, ensure that we're protecting people who are working on their own in maybe a church, so lone worker policy. So you kind of gather experience and that serves churches. And give me some connections there.
Yeah, I think when I started with the Evangelical Movement of Wales, I was convinced that everything I'd done until then, and I say done, I'd been led. God took me step by step, you know, and everything I'd done had prepared me for that particular role.
Yeah,
I made lots of mistakes. I think one of the things that I can say now, I'm not trying to protect any reputation or build any reputation. You know, I am what I am. God has made me what I made, and I've failed where I failed. And so I'm not protecting anything. But to say to every single one of the folk who watch this or listen to it, failure is not terminal. You know, failure is God's way of teaching you something. Embrace. You haven't sought to fail. You know, things have gone wrong, maybe. Embrace it. God's the God who brings honey out of rocks.
Yeah.
And I've had to show time and time again, my own experience, disappointment. For example, I didn't get the job I wanted in David when David changed to Carmarthenshire. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was a disaster, but God had a role for me in Newport, which became just wonderful. You know, I worked with head teachers who were just gold dust, and with folk who were in the team I was in were just outstanding. They genuinely cared about children, and it was a privilege to work with them. So all those things were building up from my experience, and failure is not the end of it all.
Yeah.
We don't want to fail, and hopefully we won't. But so anyway, when I started in the MW, I guess I was just pulling together issues around leadership. I think leadership's so important, and maybe later I can share a few models that I found particularly helpful.
That would be great.
And when you're very busy and lots of things happening, so I would be saying that the people who work in churches as elders, deacons, officers are gold dust, and quality people who are servant-hearted make such a difference. And that's what I began to find more and more as the days went by, finding people who wanted to serve, who were servant-hearted, who genuinely wanted to give their lives, you know, for the service of the Lord, and not to draw attention to themselves.
David, you talked a lot about leadership, and you talked about different models that you've come across in your work career that are useful for churches, for people to hear about. Take us through some of those models that you've found that are excellent, just to help us think maybe differently for the first time about leadership.
Okay. Just to give you a background to these, one of my roles was to clear up after United Beach missions in Newquay in mid Wales. So I turned up there to clear up after 5 or 6 weeks of mission. And the leader that week had been a chap called Robert Thomas, who was, I knew him well, but I didn't know what he was doing. And he decided he would help me to shift all these leftovers to the rubbish tip. So that's a good way to get to know somebody, isn't it? Clear rubbish, take it to the rubbish tip. And so that's what we did. And on the way, I said to him, "So what are you doing now, Robert?" He said, "Oh, I'm starting to work for an international consultancy company." "Oh, really?" I said, "What sort of things do you do?" "Well, we advise officers and chief executives of companies, and we coach them." "Oh," I said, "that's interesting. I've just started in Newport. Perhaps you could come and help us." Well, eventually he did turn up. He helped 24 head teachers. He had one 10-week coaching session available. I offered it to the director of education. He said he didn't want it, so I had it. So for 10. So how do you get to know, improve, and learn how to do things? You empty the rubbish at a rubbish tip, and you talk to the people who are with you. Just God's wonderful ways. Anyway, the models, some of the models I picked up, which are really important to me. The first one is looks like a triangle, and if you sort of pull it together, it's a picture of who you are, and it's basically a triangle. At the top has your identity. Who am I? And when you're trying to understand yourself and your organization, because you can use it for that as well, the top part is who am I? I'm a child of God. The next part is what's important to me. What are our values? What are our beliefs? What really matters to us? And so the interesting thing is that who you are drives what's important to you. I am a child of God. Therefore, all the things that he loves, I love. Those are the things that really matter to me. And the next level is what I do. So what do I do? Well, I do the things that are important to me because I'm a child of God. So who I am drives what's important to me, what's vital to me, and what I do. And then the last thing is the world around me. What do I look like? What does my world look like? What does my life look like? And that's all driven by what I do, what's important to me, and who I am. And so there's a picture of who we are just in a triangle. And the really interesting thing is if they're aligned, if who I am, if what's important to me, and if what I do and the world, if they're aligned, that's incredibly powerful. Very powerful. And but you see, the snag is that with many of us, who I am, say the top of the triangle might be here, and instead of being aligned underneath, what's important to me is something quite different. And what I do is quite different. So I'm never aligned. Alignment is very powerful. Whereas if you're all over the shop, if what's important to you is different from what you do, different from your world, you're all over, and you can apply that to a church as well, to an organization, a church. Who are we? What's important? What's really important to us? What do we do? And what's our world look like? Now, here's the danger in church leadership and in leadership generally. We go in at the level of what we do. But actually, that's not going to drive anything. What's going to drive change and drive us is who we are and what's important to us. Instead of us talking about what do we do all the time, we need to talk about those two higher levels, which drive. And so I find that incredibly helpful.
So that's the first kind of model. What have you got in terms of sort of leadership and action-centered leadership? What have you got on that?
Okay. Well, John Adair, when I was this is interesting. Failure leads to success. So it doesn't always feel that way. I was once asked if I would lead the introduction of combined science across Wales by the WJC. And I told my head teacher, and he said, "You can't do that. That's immoral." I mean, I didn't know what was immoral about it, but anyway, he said no. And that was so disappointing. I just thought, well, I've been asked a major opportunity here, and he's turned me down. Anyway, less than a year later, he came and said, "Do you want to do a one-term training opportunity?" Which basically meant 15 weeks of being out of school and going and being trained in whatever I wanted to be trained in. So I didn't know the difference then between leadership and management. So I asked if I could do 15 weeks on leadership. Changed my life, certainly changed my professional life, helped me with a spiritual way as well. Anyway, one of the models that came up that year was an old model, but it's a really helpful one. John Adair, Action-Centered Leadership. Find it on any website, I would think. but it's helpful because it's not just about leadership. And this is now we're talking about what we do rather than the values, right? So we're now into what we do, driven by who we are, driven by what's important to us. And here's the thing: leadership is not. It's about three things: achieving a task, building a team, and helping individuals. Now, that's what we're doing all the time in churches. It's a selfless, servant-hearted approach. What am I trying to do? We're trying to get the gospel out. And I guess there are other things as well, obviously. Take that as an example. We're trying to get the gospel out. So we don't want things getting in the way. We want to reach out to lost people. And we want to be clear about the tasks. So we need to define our tasks. And then we need to know that we're building a team in the church. It's us working together. It's not individuals. And we're also trying to develop individuals. So we bring people in who others might have discarded or others might think are not particularly brilliant, but actually we put them in the team, we develop them, and we take care of them. And that, when you're in a team like that, it's just a wonderful, wonderful thing to be doing. So, for example, on beach missions, we spot people when they're young, and we say, this is a person who's going to develop into a leader. And so we try and support and help and encourage that person, but still making them part of a beach mission team, the bigger team and the individual team. So I find that a really helpful model. So very quickly, identifying the task, defining it, making it clear to the people involved, really clear, so that they know what we're about, because often we assume they understand it and they haven't been told, no one told me. So explain it, being clear about that. Then building a team, encouraging people, being positive, giving feedback. In this book, Ken Blanchard's book about monkeys, he's got another one called The 1 Minute Manager. And in that, he says, feedback is the breakfast of champions.
Okay. Yeah,
it's true, isn't it? So to build a team, give good feedback. And then to develop individuals, matching jobs to people, not overstretching them, but then stretching them when you need to. So all sorts of things. But the model's fairly clear. It's an old-fashioned model, but really helpful.
Yes, really.
Because it takes you away from I'm doing my little job to we're doing something much bigger here.
Love it. Keep going. Tell me more. What else have you got here?
So there's another model, which is a really interesting model. And for me, this was a game changer in a big way. And we used this a lot when we were in Newport. It's basically understanding mindset. So knowing yourself and understanding other people. And basically you've got, it's called Herman brain dominance theory. It all started on the way to a rubbish tip. Anyway, so if you divide if you think of a quartile, so you divide your sheet or your screen into 4, then you ask how do people think? Now, this was rocket science to me when I heard it first. I thought everyone thought the same way as I did, right? I thought that if I thought it was a good idea, everybody would think this is a good idea.
Yeah.
So I moved into Newport as an assistant director of education with a big team under me, and thinking, if I think of good ideas, they'll all think they're good ideas. What an idiot. So what I had to learn was that some people are built like me, and God has made us so that ideas are important to us, right? And so some people are ideas people. I was. But some people are not ideas people at all. Some people are analytical. So I'm a chemist by training, chemical chemist, a doctor that doesn't do you any good, and I'm an analytical.
Yeah.
So I want to know about things. Tell me the information. But other people are not interested in the information. They're interested in people.
Yeah.
And people are really important to them. But then other people are more interested in steps and process. So it's not about give me a good idea. It's tell me the steps I need to achieve to do this. Now, So here's an example. My wife is into people and steps. That's how God has made her.
Yeah.
I'm into ideas and analysis. So if you've got the four corners, I'm the top two corners. My wife is the bottom two corners. We live in two different worlds. And it took a long, long time to realize.
This has helped your marriage as well.
Yeah, exactly. I'd come home and I'd say, Pat, I've just been asked to run a camp for 60 young people in Wales. Isn't that just truly wonderful? And her head would go down, not because she didn't want to do it. She loves camps. She became a Christian through camps. But she was thinking of the million steps that would need to be taken to keep these kids alive while I was leading the camp. So for her, so we were in different worlds. And one of the most important things to learn when you're in leadership is that the most powerful person in any situation is the person who can move into any of the mindsets. So, for example, if you were drawing it out, mine would be strong in ideas over here, strong in analysis, very weak in terms of steps and people. And I've learned that God has helped me to know that it's vital to be into people, and supporting people, and it's vital to be into steps. But there is another slide which I think you'll be putting up. It's just very quickly associates what's important to people. What's important to people. For example, if you're into ideas, what's important to you? Top right-hand corner is freedom, variety, ideas, and risk. You're okay with risk.
Yeah.
If you're into analysis, what's important to you is achievement, accuracy, clarity, caution. If you're into people, trust is important to you, relationships are important, learning is important, warmth's important, feelings are important. Very different values, all within God's making of us all. And then if you're into process, this is really important. You're into control. You need to be in control. Yeah. You need to order. You need safety, stability, protocol. And what happened to me when I moved into Newport is here was I thrashing all these ideas out. And someone stopped me one day and gave me some feedback. And they said, we have more pilot projects in Newport than the Luftwaffe. I knew I was in trouble, and I had to listen. And these people were steps people.
Yeah.
And so bit by bit, we all learned in the team that we didn't think the same way. It wasn't because anyone was wrong. It was because of the way God had made us.
Yeah.
And in a team, to understand the different mindsets impact on what's important to them and what values they have is so important.
Yeah.
So instead of having friction in teams, you understand, oh, well, no wonder he said that, because people matter to him. And I should have been more caring about people. Or this person is in charge of finance and control is important to them. Well, they need to know that their control is only for one purpose, to get the gospel out and to oil the machine that's God has got called the church, in order to get the gospel out. Yeah. And so it's not inappropriate, but it's how you blend those things together, and mindsets are really critical. So there's a lot more I could say about it, but for us,
really
it was a really big change. And you must understand that not everyone thinks the same way. So in a church meeting, throw out a good idea. The way I now do it with my wife, what my wife does with me is say, I've got a great idea. So she gets into my mindset straight away. Whereas now I say, Pat, what steps shall we take to help these people to, right? And it's being loving in terms of understanding the way people think. Yeah. And it's so important, and it can really, really help the way teams operate. So there's a lot more I could say, but I think
that's really helpful. And I think as we listen to this, and it inspires us to go and find out more about these mindsets and these different different ways of thinking. When you're in a church and you're in an eldership, or you've got deacons and elders that are working, they are going to be on opposite spectrums here, aren't they? Because deacons are process. We like to think about steps. We like order. we love people, we connect with people. And so there's a difference, isn't there? And often in churches, you can find the conflict that can exist, can't you, between deacons and elders? And I'm sure we've all got experience of those. But so your advice is great. Understanding people, understanding the kind of leaders that you're working with, or the volunteers that you're working with in your teams. This will help you to approach it slightly differently, which does care for other people. And it does get results, doesn't it?
Exactly, and it's all within a scriptural framework. This is not we're all brighter than Scripture. This is Scripture applied, in my view, in a loving way, bearing in mind. And the last one that's important is when things go wrong.
Yeah.
Now, in every church, things do go wrong, sadly, and we're all sinful, and we all fail in that area. And sometimes it's because we're not loving enough, or even taking time to understand people. Mm-hmm. However, there's a slide which you'll probably put up, and it's a picture of a boat, and someone who's at the end of the boat that isn't sinking is saying, "I'm sure glad the hole isn't in our end." But it's one boat and one hole, and the whole ship's going down.
Yeah.
But I would never claim to be able to solve problems in churches in that way. The prayer and love, patience, care, love, joy, peace, all those things, the work of the Spirit within the church. But one thing I would advise is that there is one simple question that if it's the culture of the church to ask it, it changes things. Mm-hmm. If it's not the culture of the church, then it won't make any difference. But if you can develop a culture that says it's okay to ask this question, how did I contribute to this mess?
Yeah.
Not how did they?
Yeah.
How did I contribute to this mess? And if I can ask that question honestly and openly before the Lord and before other people, and say, actually, this is how I contributed to it. And I'm not pointing the finger. I'm telling you, I did contribute to this. I was quiet when I should have said something. I said something when I should have been quiet, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Or I knew about it, but I didn't have time to do anything. But whatever it would be, I contributed. And when you do that, and then you ask the question again, how can I not do that again? How can I make sure I don't contribute to that again? Then you're onto how can we improve out of this mess and learn from this mess.
Yeah.
So learning from problems, and especially being able to ask it in a genuine way, how did I contribute to this?
Yeah.
I think is a way of helping and diffusing and encouraging. There's a lot more to say on that, obviously, but there's a hint and a direction and an encouragement really to resolve things.
No, I think that's great. Talk to us about what the EMW is doing to kind of support deacons and treasurers. Have you done anything over the last few years?
We had weekly meetings in the lockdown, and themes and a little bit of Bible exposition, also talking about issues that are important to people. And that was helpful. And that's moved into a podcast. But our plan is to try and provide better support for deacons and elders. I mean, especially now, you talk about safeguarding. Serious mistakes can be made in that, and their profound impact, or just financial regulations, or charity commission issues. Just being clear on those things, and encouraging folk to work alongside those rulings, and lots of model issues being raised and so on. There's so much need. It doesn't stand still. In the past, you might be a treasurer and that was it. But these days, things are moving and you have to be on the ball. And it's great when you're not sure and you meet with someone, and it's not helpful when someone says you could read these 15 books. Yeah, thank you very much. I'm a busy person. I'm professionally stretched. I'm family stretched, and I'm stretched. And you're telling me to read 15 books. If I meet someone who actually points me to helpful documentation, goes through it with me, gives me the highlights.
Yeah.
I can then work through it. I know what I'm talking about, and be safeguarded from unnecessary error. So it's really supporting church. See, one of the dangers we've got is independence can become isolation.
Yeah.
And isolation is dangerous because when troubles hit, you're on your own.
Yeah.
But when if your independence becomes interdependence, then you're in a strong position because you're working together and folk are looking after your back, as it were, as you're looking for them. So it's really encouraging people to move from isolation to interdependence, and but not in any sense lording it over anybody. We're servants helping other servants, and we're trying to share good practice, which is what I was trying to do all the time I was working education, get people to share good practice. And quite what happened in Newport, with head teachers sharing good practice was truly amazing. What some of those head teachers did, and teachers, just amazing. And what's happening in churches across Wales is amazing. So a little church in Roach, when you drive into St David's from Haverfordwest, you wouldn't spot the church on the right-hand side in the middle of a field, Roach. But if you go to that church, some of the things that are happening there is genuinely amazing, and things that you can pass on to other people, that they're doing, and we can learn from good practice there. And then up the valleys, other people doing great things, working in schools and sharing the gospel, again, great things that are happening around Wales, and be able to share that and learn from it and encourage those who are doing it, because they don't think there's anything special about it because they're doing it in their church, but actually it's very special. It's God's given them to do,
It's so beneficial, isn't it, to link up with other churches, link up with other leaders, to find a treasure in another church, and to have a coffee every couple of months. I think that's a huge benefit. And I think if exactly what you're saying, if you feel like you're on your own, if you feel like you're in isolation, then reach out to EMW, reach out to FIC, reach out to the church office. There are places, aren't there, where you can go and connect. So big encouragement to do that. David, we've covered so much today, and we've talked about leadership, we've talked about failure, we've talked about ourselves and how we need to think about our own mindsets, how we apply that to other people, how we build teams. I mean, you've got so much good stuff in there. So thank you so much for sharing your experience and giving up your time to come on the podcast today is a great thing. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, thank you for what you're doing. I think what you're doing is really excellent, and helping people who need help, who are not necessarily recognized or, as you say, appreciated perhaps as much as they ought to be. But we're still servants, and it's not about us, it's about the gospel. And but you're doing a great job. I think it's really excellent. I hope this contributes a little bit, at least, towards the effectiveness of what you're doing.
And I hope the church office can serve, churches that are in EMW. And
absolutely.
We want to make our resources free for everyone to use. And God's blessed us in our church. And so to be able to serve other churches is really important to us. So great. Tell us about the EMW conference to finish, because you've got two conferences that would be great to do a little promo about.
Yeah, there's a ministers' conference in early June, and that's being planned, and there's some great speakers talking about personal revival and revival across Wales, but not in a sort of traditional way of doing it, really. And also looking at some international work, God's work in remarkable ways. So that's the ministers' conference, is 3 or 4 days, beginning of June. The English conference in Aberystwyth, called the ABBA conference, is meeting in August. I think it's first full week in August. Paul Mallard is the main speaker, and from Bath, I think. And there are other speakers from across the country: Sammy Davis, Matt Bounds, Marion Thomas from Newport, Andy Christides, previously near
St Mellons, wasn't it? Yeah.
St Mellons, yeah. Gary Brady, and Paul is there as well. Paul Gamston. So lots of encouraging time. There's a Welsh conference as well the week after in Aber, and that's important. So again, praying for the folk. I think it's John Treharn from Llanelli is speaking at that. Yeah. So it's really important. We in Wales, evangelism in English is desperately needed, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, yeah.
But the evangelism through the medium of Welsh, if we think it's tough for the English speakers, it's very tough for the Welsh speakers, because they've known, they think they understand what Christianity is really about. Well, there's a lot of learning to do there. So it's praying for the English speakers and Welsh speakers across Wales as the gospel goes out. Anyway, there we are, just a few things. And you've got something coming up as well, I hear.
Yeah, we're organising a conference called the Rebuild Conference, just to, again, the same heart to gather leaders across, Wales and further, just to encourage them, I guess, in, what all God's called them to do, encourage them in the grace of God. And I think if you're listening and you're a treasurer, we're talking about training, we're talking about leadership, we're talking about, networking and spending time with others. Conferences are great. And so if you're a treasurer and someone comes and asks you, can I go to this conference? Can I spend the money to do this? Let's go big on that this year. Training and, opportunities to get together. That's so important. So recommend, we give our time for our staff and volunteers to attend these things. They are really important. So brilliant. Well, thank you for joining us on the Church Office. David, thank you for those that have been listening or watching online. And please check out the website for resources and policies and documents and things that might save you time, things that might give you that little bit of confidence. Who else has done this? You might find something on the site that serves, and please feel free to download it and use it for free. And please share the podcast if you think there's somebody that would benefit from, connecting with sort of discussions and topics that we talk about behind the scenes, and then please pass on the podcast and recommend it. Well, thank you very much for your time. That's great, and we'll look forward to seeing you again on the podcast.
Every blessing, Bill. Thank you.
Bye-bye.